Good evening, folks. Welcome. I see a few people's names popping in here. Hey, Autumn.
Hey,
Good to see you.
you
Long
too.
time, my friend.
I
Hello,
know.
Alyssa. Good to see you as well. Welcome. How y'all doing this evening?
Good. This is a nice break in my workday.
I feel ya. I know. Well, welcome to the Kind Boss's Guide to Tough Conversations. How many tough conversations have you all had today? Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. All right. Well, let's give a few more minutes to have a few more folks join before I get started. But while we're waiting, if you would be so kind, drop the city you are in right now and a link to your LinkedIn bio. I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for connection, engagement as well. Um, so if you can drop it in the chat so we can stay connected. Also, this is going to be interactive. So if you have a pen, piece of paper handy, make sure you grab it, or even your phone, like your notes app. The goal of this is for you all to be engaged, and I want to hear from you. All righty. Good stuff. Alyssa, how's your week been? It's been a minute since I've seen you.
I know. I'm actually getting over a cold, kind of in the middle of one. So kind of just taking it slow, but
Okay.
still trying to get through the fast pace of what the holiday brings at communities and schools.
I hear ya. I know. What kind of fun holiday parties are folks having?
So we just had our holiday party today. So we did our annual like ornament exchange. We did our Secret Santa. Then we have a big lunch together as a team. So yeah, and then tomorrow and then probably for the next week and a half, we'll be sorting Christmas presents to give to our sites. So it's a lot of fun within the next week and a half.
Oh, I love it. Do you all shut down
Yes.
for the holiday break?
So we get from Christmas Eve off all the way until New Year's
Years.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I know.
Yeah.
I know. I'm in a similar boat. I usually shut down around like Christmas Eve, yeah, through the beginning of the year. So it's
Yep.
a nice joy. It's a nice jaunt of
Yes.
space. All right. Well, listen, I want to make sure that we have enough time to dive into everything. So as folks join, I will absolutely let them come through. But welcome, like I said, welcome to the Kind Boss's Guide to Tough Conversations. I am Kibi Anderson, and I want to, before we get started, just kind of set the stage for what we are going to be covering today. I imagine y'all are here because you're looking to navigate tough conversations, but what does that actually look like in terms of the agenda for today? So I want to start with what we're going to cover. All right. So we've got a reflection exercise and what I call the Kind Bosses scorecard. At the end of the day, I really want all of us to be aligned in understanding what is our current relationship to tough conversations. Like, how do we actually show up on the kind of kind boss, scale when it comes to navigating and moving through things? I want to highlight really why communication matters, like why you should care, especially given a lot of the dynamics that we're dealing with in today's marketplace. And then we dive into a simple tool for tough conversations. And this is really the meat of the talk to really help you get some insight into some of the steps you can take to really be able to navigate through difficult, sticky situations. And I want to preface when I say tough, sometimes we can think it means you're having an argument or you're having a breakdown. And while that matters, oftentimes a conversation can just be tough because you don't know what to say, right? Like, or you're concerned about how you're going to come across. So opening the spectrum. Maybe you have a client that you're trying to close. You're not quite sure how to actually move that conversation forward. Or you have a partner you want to bring on board. Tough is much more holistic than you might think in terms of communication, arguments, and disagreements. And so that's why communication becomes such a powerful tool that influences so many parts of your lives, right? And then lastly, we'll dive into real life success stories that I can share from my experience working with clients over the last 10 years in my own life. And then obviously strategies that are applicable to some of those situations that might really resonate, hopefully, with some of the things you're dealing with today. And then I want to create space for a live Q&A. Again, this is all about interactivity. It's difficult to learn conversation without doing it. So I ask you all to please show up, be present, engage. And then I have an exclusive invitation that I want to make sure I highlight at the end of this. At this point, thumbs up if y'all feel good about that. Anything uh, feel out of sorts. Thumbs up. All right. Yeah, I want to make sure y'all are present and engaged. I know y'all could be anywhere tonight. So I appreciate you being here. And I just want to say thank you. All right. So you two have known me either in personal situations or obviously via referral, but I do want to share a little bit more about who I am and my story and how I actually came to really caring so much about this idea of tough conversations, effective communication. So, at my core, I'm an executive coach. I'm a corporate leader and kind of manager turned into a person who was passionate about working with teams, the brightest teams. You can see some of the places that I work with: Netflix, Google, Nike. And prior to coming to the coaching world, I actually managed teams myself. I managed big P&Ls. Some of the companies I used to work for include Bloomberg Media, ABC News. I founded a company called Red Table Talk. I've had a lot of training at some of the best universities, Harvard, NYU. And I actually have certifications as well from the kind of the Global Coaching Federation called ICF. And despite all of that, I will never forget the first time that I had to let somebody go. Like, I was new in a role, recently promoted. And even though this person had been there throughout my recruiting time, he was initially on my team as a peer. When I got promoted, the reality was I had to let him go. And when I tell you the fear and the trepidation and the guilt and all of the things that came along with that really, really had me up at night, really had my stomach in knots. It was extremely excruciating and it really, really just left an impression on me. And I wonder just how many of you all can relate to this idea of like having to do something to someone that you actually like he was really cool. And yet I knew I had to do it because the truth was he didn't have the core skills and qualifications that I needed him to have in order to push forward on a lot of the stuff that was what that our group was being tasked with. And so I was really, really stuck. I was really, really stuck. And that was one situation that stayed with me for a long time because I did it. And even though I kind of stumbled my through it, I really began to be like, is this it? Like, I can't imagine having to continue doing this because I felt so awful. So that's one pivotal experience in my life that really led me here. The other one was the first time someone told me that I had a tone issue. How many of you all have ever had somebody kind of criticize you? I was in the middle of a meeting. I was really passionate about what I was pitching. The, idea I had, I thought was so excited. And so I brought that energy. And it was like a slap in the face when in my attempts to sort of get people to come on board, the one of the people in the room actually said to me, he'd be like, "Why are you being so aggressive?
Mm.
Like, you sound so mean. Like, why are you being so mean?" And I was like, "Whoa, wait, what are you talking about?" How many of you have even experienced that, right? Like, you think you're saying one thing, but then somebody says something in response, and it just literally it shook me. Like, it really shook me because I was like, what the heck? Ashley, I see your hand raised. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that someone's hand? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. And please, if you have, kind of put a one in the chat if you can relate to that. Um, I found that conversation very destabilizing. And again, as somebody who had had so much success over the course of my life, to be in a room where I thought people were cheering for me and rooting for me, say something as like brazen and kind of impactful and really hurtful as that really shook me. And it was in that moment that I began to ask myself, okay, do I have a tone issue? Like, first of all, let me just be real. Like, do I have a tone issue? Because these are some of the questions that I had never really been forced to ask because I had had so much success over time. And by the grace of God, I had a few friends who kind of pulled me aside and were able to really give me some honest feedback in a very vulnerable situation. And it was in that moment that I began to reflect, I had such a hard time trying to let this person go. I'm being told that I have a tone issue. Like, I've spent all this money, I've done all these things at these big companies. Why don't I know how to do this? Like, why have I never been taught how to kind of navigate communication? Have I taken communication for granted, because I've been able to push through and have results? So these are some of the struggles that I went through. And it's what led me to ultimately decide to coach in this area. And as I began to work with more and more leaders, and I've been doing this over the past decade, I began to recognize that communication was the biggest culprit for why so many of my clients were struggling. So many of my clients are struggling. And so that's why I decided to double down on this idea of how do I help leaders communicate more effectively? Because one of the things that I began to recognize, and I love this quote by Esther Perel, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships, and the quality of your relationships is absolutely impacted by how you communicate. And when you are not communicating effectively, it has ripple effects. It can influence every aspect of your life, how you're engaging with your friends, your coworkers, how you're actually showing up in your own mind. Like, are you moving through the world with confidence, or are you moving through the world because you're telling yourself a lot of stories that are destroying your confidence? Right? Like, are you moving through the world creating high trust relationships, or are you a little nervous because you're concerned about how you are coming across? You're overthinking. Like, these are all the things that can kind of pop up when you don't focus on communication. And the most beautiful thing about this is as I began to do my own work, really began to coach myself and dive into books and take other courses to really help me become the coach that I am, the results that I got were transformational. Like, even in my own life. And I can talk about a few examples from other clients as we move through, but this idea of seeing the impact in real dollars and cents of me improving how I led with curiosity, learning how to better regulate my emotions whenever somebody said something, right? Like, I got a comment, you seem like you're being aggressive. Thinking about what my own responses would be in terms of my tone, I saw a transformation. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. I was in the early stages of me beginning to really lean in on this. I had moved away from working for somebody else and launched my own company. And I had been toiling away for kind of several months trying to figure out how to break through. And as soon as I began to unlock the things that we're going to dive into today, I went from making no money to making 3 times what I had made in my old job. Mind you, I had been working a full-time job. I left that job. And as I began to really lock in on some of these, on the tools and the skills that we're going to dive into, I saw my revenue 3x, my revenue 3x, to the point where I was making $250,000 working a fourth of the time that I had worked in my previous job. Those are very specific things. My stress level went down. I started to have more fun. I was able to hire team members, let folks go, give them critical feedback in a way that helped me help me create a high performing team. And this was all because I was able to lean into communication. So my hope at the end of, today is that you're able to recognize how these things can influence and transform your own life, right? Like, if you're in a position where you're really trying to close perhaps your ideal job, how leaning more into these silent skills can help you get the promotion, can help you get the raise, can help you close that, kind of partner. Perhaps if you're in an organization where you're having to do a lot more cross collaboration with other organizations, it can really transform. All right, so that's my story. Now I want to shift and give you all an opportunity to think about your specific stories. Really make this personal. So, as I shared, I want to start with a reflection exercise, and then we're going to move into the scorecard. So, get your pen and paper out, or get your, app, whatever you're going to do, and I want you to think about a recent communication breakdown that you had at work. Think about, or maybe if you haven't had a communication breakdown, maybe there's a conversation you need to have, but you've been avoiding, like a problem you've been trying to avoid. And I want you to think and reflect and answer some questions that I'm going to read out to you. Just jot them down because we're going to reference them as we go through the rest of the session. All right. So the first thing is, what happened? Who was involved? Maybe write down the other person's name, write down your name, but just be very clear, like, who was involved and what happened. Second, I want you to answer, what emotions were you feeling at the time? What emotions were you feeling at the time? Third question, how would you describe your tone? How would you describe your tone during the interaction? Number 4, what questions did you ask, if any? And again, if you haven't had this conversation, what are the questions you want to ask to hopefully get closer to some sort of resolution to make you feel better? And then lastly, what did you say and how did the other person respond? And again, if you haven't had this conversation, what do you want to say? And perhaps what do you think the other person will say in response? All righty. So just to give you all, as people are continuing to kind of write down their answers, drop in the chat, one word that describes the emotions that you felt in that last conversation or last exchange, or even kind of how you're feeling now. I'd love to hear and see what folks are saying. Drop something in the chat. Let's see. We've got oh, frustrated, misunderstood. Absolutely. Let me get it. Frustration. Yes, frustration is a lot. Misunderstood, frustration. Yeah, it's a very, very common thing. And again, there's no wrong answers. The whole point is to get you all in the practice of beginning to recognize the emotion. Timid and afraid. That's common. You know you need to speak up, but you're not exactly sure. All right. Thank you. All right, so now I want to shift to what I call looking at the the Kind Boss's guide. The Kind Boss's score guide. So we were talking a little bit about with the reflections, kind of individual examples. Now I want to zoom out and really give everybody a chance to assess, where do you fall on this Kind Boss and your ability to have tough conversations? Like what are some of the assessments that we can begin to honestly make about current challenges that we maybe have kind of at the macro level patterns you might be dealing with? All right. So I'm going to ask you all 5 questions. And if you are answering yes to the question, I want you to put a 1. Right? We're gonna do a score tally. If your answer to these questions is no, nope, I'm not dealing with any of this, don't put anything. All right. And I'm going to ask you each question one at a time. You can see the questions here. So I'm just going to read them out to give everybody a chance to kind of reflect. But thumbs up if everybody understands the part of this, the point of this exercise, just so I can see. Great. Okay, cool. All right. So are you avoiding addressing problems? Are you avoiding addressing problems? The answer is yes. Put a 1 and just write it down so we can begin to tally it up. Number 2, do you find yourself repeating the same points in conversations over and over again? All right, I see Autumn, I see you kind of shaking your head a little bit. If not, don't put anything. But if you do, you're saying something, people are saying they hear you, but then when you actually get to the point of action, that ain't nothing happening. Like they're not doing it. All right, good stuff. All right, number 3, are arguments, misunderstandings, and tension common in your exchanges? Like, does it feel like every time you have a conversation with people, there's always some sort of misunderstanding, some sort of argument, or it's not easy. It's not flowing. And that could be because of you, or it could be because of the other person, but you're sensing a sense of tension. Yes. All right. Number 4, do you struggle to keep your emotions in check during high stake conversations? And this is like a real one, because I had to be honest, like I definitely struggle with this one even today. Yeah, definitely. If someone says something that you don't necessarily agree with or like, how hard is it for you to not pop off, for lack of a better word, or maybe when you are being triggered and you should say something, you don't. You get quiet, right? Because this can show up in multiple ways. So if that's a 1, write that down. And then number 5, are you feeling exhausted or burned out? Yeah. And we know it's the holiday, so kind of take that off, but just more holistically, are you finding yourself saying, I am exhausted and I am burned out? All righty. Gotcha. I see a lot of 1s up here. Okay. I'm not mad at it. All right. So I want you to tally up your score. So if you said 1 for all of them, it's 5. If you said 1 for 4, it's 4. And I want you to drop it in the chat. And remember, this is a judgment-free zone. This is not about criticizing. This is about helping you grow. All right. I love it. Okay. So we got 2, 2, 3. All right. We got 3.5. 2. Okay. Shout out to Sheena and Alexandria and Alyssa. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting the scores. Okay. So I'm seeing an average, which is about 3.5. All right. So this is what your scores mean. If you scored a 1 or less, great job. You are navigating conversations amazingly. I can probably come have you help me teach this. If you scored a 2 or more, it's a sign that communication habits might be contributing to the challenges that you reflected earlier, the feelings of irritation, the feelings of frustration, the feelings of anxiety, the feelings of intimidation, or feeling a little bit overwhelmed, things like that. All right. So I would love somebody drop a word in the chat that describes, I'm sorry, drop one word in the chat that describes what stood out most to you during this exercise, either in the reflection part or in the scoring, the kind bosses score. Like what stood out most to you? What was maybe perhaps the most surprising? I see Ashley saying emotional avoidance. Absolutely. Yeah. Communication is oftentimes a balance between managing your emotions, avoiding the reality that you have to manage your emotions, and how everything shifts at any given time because life is static. People are not, because life is not static. People are not static. So, how we're actually navigating and moving through this is really, really important. All righty. Repeating the same points. I think that I'm clear and direct, but often have to repeat things. Exactly. Why do I have to repeat things? If I think I'm saying it, why is it that the other person is not getting? What is not happening to ensure that there is mutual understanding across the board? All righty. So now that we have reflected on your communication patterns, maybe a specific situation, I want to dive into why this matters so much. And I talked about it from a personal perspective when I talk about my journey to this entire kind of crusade around really helping people figure out how to manage communication more effectively. But at the end of the day, communication impacts so much at work. It's not just about exchanging information. Again, it's about how are you building trust? How are you closing deals? How are you ensuring that you are making safe spaces for people that you are looking to collaborate with, right? It's impacting everything you do as a leader. And this is a stat that really stands out for me. 70% of employees say unclear communication impacts their work performance. Right. So when I see you, Sheena, when I hear you say, Sheena, I'm repeating the same things. I think I'm being clear, but I often have to repeat them again. What are your thoughts? And I'd love for you to come off mute and actually share. What do you think is happening? If you were to come to me,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I would say part of it is, how would I articulate this? I think that I joke with my team sometimes that I am direct, but I'm also friendly. And, in the 5 questions that you asked, I don't have as much a issue with my emotions or that during my interactions, but sometimes I actually feel like I need to be a little bit more harsh. Maybe not harsh, but because I'm being direct, but I'm being compassionate, I'm being friendly, and frankly, sometimes I think people don't take it seriously. Then they're like, "Oh, well, she's still being nice, so you know,
Yeah.
maybe this isn't as they're not taking it as differently as I think they would take from someone else." So that's a piece of it because I do think that I write things out, I say things very clearly, but I kind of move on, and I'm not a big consequences person, and I think that I don't know. I think for some people they do need consequences sometimes, and that's not really a strong suit of mine.
Yeah, definitely. Who here can relate to the idea of perhaps sugarcoating the real emotion that you have because you're trying to be nice? I see a lot of absolutely. This is one of the biggest challenges that leaders have because we all want to be liked, right? Like we all want to make sure that people feel good when they are in our presence. And yet, the importance of also setting clear expectations, communicating consequences is what I'm hearing Sheena says is also just as important, if not even more important. And so, how do you balance the two? That's really what this is about. And my overall point with this is just saying that when the communication breaks down, when you're not able to balance the two, it has ripple effects across the board. Because I can only imagine, Sheena, for you, when your team doesn't hear you and do what you want, what happens? Like, what are some of the real consequences of that?
Well,
Sheena?
when I was gonna say, I don't even know if it's that I want to be liked. Maybe that's a part of it. I think I just want to make sure I'm not disrespectful because I feel like my what I'm sometimes feeling underneath, I want to say like, what the hell are you doing? And so in order to not be like that, I kind of go in the opposite direction, of
Yeah.
trying to be really clear. But I think on the consequences, I mean, it's what you have here. Like I find that people are, it's like a who's on first kind of thing. Like people are seem very unclear, even with things that I think have been talked about multiple times.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is you are not alone, first of all, Sheena. So just know that I work with a lot of clients. You are not alone. So do not feel bad. But to your point, it's so essential that we get the right tools so we can change this dynamic, right? That's essential because to your point, the confusion keeps people stuck. And so what we're going to dive into today are tools to really help you explore how to do that in a more consistent way and in a more successful way. So the first thing I want to highlight as we dive into some of the tools is that there are 3 levels of communication that you are navigating at any given time when you are having a conversation, right? The first level is how you're communicating with yourself. So Sheena's point really brings us to life. How are you managing your emotions? How are you ensuring that you are being clear before you speak, right? So in your case, Sheena, when we think about what is the emotion that you're feeling and how much is that perhaps consciously or subconsciously influencing what you're saying, right? If your desire is for people to get a clear message and then move on, but your emotion is, I'm afraid that they're going to like me, how might that influence or, and more specifically, confuse your intention, your action? So really being mindful of the most important conversation you're having at any given time is with yourself. The second is with your team, right? How are you building trust? How are you giving feedback? How are you resolving conflict? So much of this is day-to-day blocking and tackling. How is your team responding? How are they actually navigating given the conversations that you're having on a day-to-day basis? And then the third level is at the organization, right? How are you inspiring and aligning on a broader scale, not only with people internally, but also your external partners, your stakeholders, right? This could be a board member. This could be your customers if you're selling a product, right? This could be funders, if you are navigating a nonprofit or trying to think about ways to ensure that at the kind of macro level, people are still feeling inspired, people are aligned, so that way everyone is moving in the right direction. Each of these levels is interconnected. And it's really important to make sure that you are mindful, because if you're struggling with self-communication, as I highlighted, it's going to show up in your team dynamics. It's going to show up in how you're engaging with your external stakeholders. So the first step in terms of really making sure that your own self-communication is what it needs to be is so essential. And I wonder which of these 3 levels, 1, 2, or 3, I'd like you to drop in the chat. Do you feel most confident or comfortable navigating? If you were to spend a little bit of time reflecting, how comfortable you feel navigating your own self-talk or your talk with your team or with your at the macro level with stakeholders? All right, I see 1. Okay. All right, which feels most challenging now? I'm going to shift it around. And note this for yourself. So I'm saying 1, 2. Yeah, definitely. These are the places where you might want to think about starting first when you're trying to understand how to use the tools that I'm going to dive into next. I want to also take a quick minute because the concepts that I'm talking through now that I'm going to dive into more are what we go through in depth in my 6-month group coaching program called Communicate Like a Pro. This is really focused on transforming your communication, transforming your leadership. And I just wanted to share a little bit about this so that as we begin to dive through the rest of the workshop, you're able to get a little bit of a taste and a teaser around what some of these concepts would look like in the execution of the full program. So I will share a little bit more about this in the link in the chat for those people who would like to look a little bit further. But if you're looking to really maximize digging deeper into any one of the three, I saw those three areas with yourself, with your team, and with your organization. I saw a few of you highlight the fact that you're navigating both. This is the types of things that we will dive into in the Communicate Like a Pro cohort. Just to give you a brief overview of what's included, it involves personalized evaluations. It's a bi-weekly module-based program that is wrapped around live coaching and a really, really dynamic support group. And you also get 2 one-on-one coaching sessions in the program. And I'll share more about this later, but for those people who are interested in signing up early, I have an exclusive bonus. And I'd like to start by asking you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your LinkedIn profile right now? Just across the board. Those of you who are on LinkedIn, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rank it? 10 being it's exceptional, 1 being what's LinkedIn? Ashley said -5. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, as a part of signing up by January 17th, for those of you who are looking to amp up your LinkedIn, and when I think about this, it's more than just what's on your LinkedIn page, because LinkedIn is really where people are going to articulate value, right? To really kind of claim and own and be able to confidently communicate the things that they can do well, whether it be externally, if you're trying to perhaps look for a new job, or internally, if you are looking to really showcase what you can do as we move into the new year. And so this is a 90-minute session one-on-one with me where we will evaluate, elevate, and make sure your messaging is putting your best foot forward into 2025. So we can dive into this a little bit later, but I just wanted to tease that out as we move into the next section of the group, which is really a very simple tool called my Oak Method, which is intended to help you lead and navigate through tough conversations. And I want to highlight this is a simple process to help transform tough conversations. It's simple, yet as we highlighted when we started, these situations that you're navigating on a day-to-day basis can be really, really tough. So I really decided to come up with a method that is simple, because I want you to remember it. I want you to be able to use it in any situation. But the context with which you guys may have to deal with this can be very complex, right? It can be a little bit more challenging. And so as you are able to navigate and work through these 3 steps, it will give you the ability to navigate tough conversations with confidence, clarity, and curiosity. All right. So my Oak Method has 3 steps. I see a few people from one of my previous clap cohorts who are here. So I just want to shout a few folks out. But I'm just going to walk through what this Oak Method is. And if you are able to really grasp this, it can be a very, very powerful tool to help you move through a lot of the scenarios that we talked about. The first step is owning your emotions. The second step is assessing your tone. And the third step is question to understand. And again, this is a simple, relatable process. I'm going to break down each of the steps for you in subsequent slides and really show you how you can bring these things to life and use it as a way to resolve any specific challenge you're having in an exchange. So the first step is owning your emotions. When I say that, what kind of comes up for people when we talk about owning your emotions? Just, I kind of what immediately comes to mind. I'd love to hear a few examples.
Acknowledging how you feel.
Yep. Anyone else? Unapologetically me. I love it. Owning your emotions is all about pausing before you speak, pausing before you take action, and actually taking control of the conversation before your emotions take control of the conversation. When we started this exercise and we started the session, the first thing I asked you to do was to reflect on the emotions that you were feeling as it relates to that communication breakdown that you may have had or that you're trying to have. I heard people say things like, I was feeling frustrated, I was feeling irritated, I was feeling worried. Where do you think these emotions come from? trauma. What else? It's real good. Childhood and past. Y'all are taking it deep. Yes, that definitely comes from childhood and past relationship issues. Why do we have emotions, y'all? Like, just give me a reason. Why? Our inability to get our message across. Yeah, where do these emotions come from? It could come from past experiences. It could, because you're a human being, right? Like, this is the reason why I want to just kind of simplify this. We are human beings. We all have emotional responses because we are wired to survive. And so the key thing to keep in mind with this step is recognizing that emotions are your friend and that they tell you things. That's one of the key things about this this step. And as you're beginning to continue to reflect on how those emotions that you highlighted in the first part of this might coming through, as a further step, how might feeling irritated, feeling anxious, feeling frustrated have impacted what you said? And I'm going to just ask a few people who are on here. Crystal, I see you here. I want to ask you, would you be open to coming off and maybe just sharing a little bit about your situation that you reflected on at the top? Are you there, Crystal? Okay. Adanta, can I pull you off? I see you there. Yeah,
Yeah,
share
absolutely.
with me a little bit about your situation and your experience.
Yeah, so this is really relevant, which is why I jumped in. I had a conversation on Monday, which already was yesterday, with a team member, and they shared some feedback in the moment after I had asked for deliverable that they felt like the executive team was being a hypocrite. And it kind of like came in a way that I did not expect. And so I kind of wrote down like kind of the emotion I had in that moment was actually I think what I shared earlier in the chat, which was just like frustrated and misunderstood.
Yeah.
And then maybe a little confused. So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah,
That's
no,
kind of the
that's absolutely
situation.
key. Yeah. No, it makes sense. And I wonder, how did that influence how you showed up in that conversation? Like, what your reaction was? What did you end up like doing, or how did it influence your behavior?
Yeah, so I think because I was caught off guard by the comment, I again when I was going to think, I think I felt defensive and so I did lean into asking clarifying questions, and I felt like even as I was asking that, like the frustration was coming through in how I was asking questions.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll pause there for a moment.
Yeah,
But that was
absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry, say that again.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the reason why the reason why I'm asking you to kind of sit and reflect is when you are having an emotional reaction, it is going to influence it, right? It's going to influence it. If you're feeling, surprised, the immediate reaction is a natural. Let me get into some defense mode. Let me get into a little bit of a defense mode. The beauty of being able to actually own and honor and describe the emotion, if you now looking back knew that you were reflecting back now that wow, I got really frustrated, what's an alternative choice if you were to pause right now that you might have taken in a way to actually get a different result that you would have wanted? Just thinking now that we're kind of looking back in hindsight, what's something different you may have said or done?
I think I actually would have said to this person, given I think we do have a really strong working relationship, we built that trust, and so I think I could have actually said to that person, like, wow, I'm like really surprised to hear. Like, I think I actually could have named what I was feeling and kind of sat with that for a moment before responding. So maybe, yeah, I think that's like the first thing I would have done, was actually kind of name the feeling that I was having in that moment to give that person understanding then where I was coming from, then how I was approaching some of the questions.
Absolutely. That's the key. I mean, you just actually typify the next step when we talk about how do you actually move through tough conversations. It's be able to name the emotion in the moment, right? So Adanta just shared, I'm actually feeling very frustrated by your statement. how much more powerful, how much more calm does that allow you to then move into the next step of having that conversation become productive instead of reductive, which potentially could have happened. So this is why that first step, own your emotions, is so clear, because it allows you to actually own the thing that's happening to you in a way that nobody can refute. I will say this, one of the most powerful things you can do when you are moving through a tough conversation is to not project why someone may have done something. I feel that you were doing this. I feel that you are making me, out to be a incompetent person, whatever that is. And the way to counter that is to actually say in a statement connected to actually your emotion. So as Adanta said, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling annoyed. The only way you can do that is if you actually spend some time thinking about what's going on. So this is why that first step in my Oak method, actually owning your emotions, becomes such a powerful tool to then go through the other two steps. All right, I'm going to keep going just to highlight all three, but I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of insight into that first step. So here, as we describe, name what you're feeling, identify the source of the emotion, and then that allows you to choose how you show up. Thank you, Adanta, for your participating in that part. All right, so let's move to the second step in my Oak method, which is assess your tone. So Adanta, I'm going to keep going with your example because it was a great one. So she was able to name, I'm feeling, remind me again what you said, frustrated? Was that it?
Yep.
Okay. So this is where we get into how you say something matters just as much as the words you use, right? So because if Adanta had said, I'm feeling frustrated, but she was yelling and screaming and cussing somebody out, how much do you think that tone would have actually been effective in helping to get to a resolution where they both felt positive? Probably low, right? So this is where this idea of assessing your tone becomes really, really key. And these are just some simple ways that tone shows up in communication breakdowns. Blaming tone. You're always missing deadlines. I've said this a lot. I will acknowledge that as a leader, I can get very frustrated and I will pop into you're always missing deadlines. You are not listening to me, right? You should know how to do this. How many of you have ever heard yourself saying these in exchanges? Maybe with your child, if you're a mother or a parent. I know a lot of my parent clients will say that. If you do not get out of my face, you better go do this thing. I've told you how to do this. Again, this is a blaming tone. Now, the way you begin to assess your tone is really layering in how do I describe this? Layering in body language and also word choices that actually indicate the tone that you care about, right? So in a Danta's situation, even though she's feeling frustrated, I would imagine her goal is to create a tone of perhaps understanding, perhaps curiosity, perhaps mutual respect, considering this is somebody that she probably had to work through together. So instead of using a blaming tone, you lead with a curious tone. Well, I've noticed some delays. Can we talk about what's going on? Sort of simple shifts that allow you to begin to actually be aware. And one thing I wanted to ask people here is, how often do you actually reflect on the tone of your body language? Like if I were to ask you, I want you to give me a tone that is supportive. What would you do with your body language to actually bring that to life? Let's see if I can get somebody else who's on here. Who else do we have? Keba, I see you here. Makeba, are you on? Can I get you to come off camera? Come on camera.
I can come off of mute, but I am
mute. That's all good.
I'm at my kitchen counter filling orders, and I look kind of crazy.
All good, Makeba. I love it. It's good to see you. Definitely.
It's good to be here. Thank you. This is all coming in so wonderfully from our group cohort.
Yeah.
The first thing I thought about if I were trying to be supportive, because I've gotten a lot of feedback from colleagues from my real estate background, some of them derogatory, but a lot about me being tall and Black, and that could be very intimidating. And so without being taking that to heart so much, I try to digest that commentary, even though it was inappropriate. to understand as a very tall person who may be intimidating. It's not the first time that I've heard it. And so for me, it would be about bringing my hands together, like in a almost like in a prayer, and leaning in, kind of like my hands in my lap, like with my fingers interlocked and leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's for me, that's kind of where and I'd be seated, I'd sit down, even if the person were standing, only because I am so tall, and I've become aware that it may be overwhelming for someone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, these are the slight shifts and variations. Thank you so much for sharing that, Makeba, that
Sure.
intentionally thinking about your tone can create options for you. Right? Like this is the reality of kind of being a leader who is looking to move and shift energy in rooms. You're trying to make sure that you are able to create a space where a certain type of activity that you are leading and need to make happen can exist. And so the amount of importance I can't stress the amount of importance it takes to become more intentional and mindful of the small things that you can do to ensure that you're getting the tone that comes across, right? And the one statistic that I often share with my clients is that 80% of communication is nonverbal. 80% of communication is nonverbal. So, how much are you smiling? How much are you actually leaning in versus leaning back? How much are you actually folding your arms or actually dropping them down? All influences tone. And so, being very, very intentional about how you are assessing your tone to ensure that you're getting you're creating the environment that you want is really key. And this becomes really, really hard when you're in high stakes situations. Because if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling frustrated, your body instinctively wants to give a tone of anger and frustration. Yet that is counter to what you actually need to do if you're trying to move through and get to a solution that works, right? So if you're feeling angry, what is the counter action with your body that you can do? Smiling. This takes practice, y'all. This takes practice because there are so many times where you want to cuss somebody out and you're like, how do I just calm? How do I just breathe? So this idea of thinking through ways to adjust that. And I'm going to challenge you all. If you think about the earlier conversation that you reflected at the start, that breakdown, what are some small shifts that you could have done to shift the tone? When you think about the tone that you wrote down, what are some small shifts in body language? What are some small shifts in, how your voice, the intonation of your voice was that could have actually influenced some of the changes? These are all things that indicate how much tone impacts the messages that you are sending and how they're received. All right. And the last step I'm going to shift is question to understand. This is my favorite because this is where we lean into this idea that curiosity has to replace assumptions. Oftentimes, so many of the conversations that we're having, the exchanges that we are in the middle of, are rooted and filled with assumptions. And assumptions are where effective communication goes to die. So, what does it mean to question to understand? It means to replace assumptions with curiosity, very simply. And so, how does that look in terms of action? It's a shift in the way you are describing and saying things. Case in point, you got this, right? How many times do you work with a team member, somebody you're managing, and instead of actually, and when you're finishing up a conversation, you got this, you good, right? And Sheena, I would wonder for those people who are struggling with saying things over and over again and perhaps not getting the results that they want, this is where you begin to have to really build a muscle, right? You should know this by now. How many folks have actually said this in conversations with folks, especially if you've trained somebody and you're like, why are you not getting this? You should know this by now is a common way that is a common way that leaders communicate that is rooted in assumptions. Alternatively, these become curiosity-based questions when they are said like this: how can I support you? So for those people who might be saying something and they think that there is alignment, a simple kind of, not simple, but a tactic and a tool that you can use to be able to ensure that they are aligned is, well, how can I support you? What am I missing here? What challenges are you facing right now? If you've said, hey, this is what I need you to do, what challenges are you facing right now to be able to do that? That additional question actually requires the person to think, process cognitively, and actually assess, oh, no, I actually do have this under control. I don't need any more clarifications from you. So just layering in those simple questions can absolutely shift the entire power of a conversation that does not happen when you lead with assumptions, right? So instead of you're not communicating enough, shift this to, well, how can we improve our communication together? What can I do to make sure that this is clear for you? Again, consistently checking in over and over and over again. What, instead of saying, why aren't you meeting my expectations? The shift becomes, what's the biggest challenge you're having in meeting those expectations? I love this. Autumn shared those questions could allow the other person to then take their own ownership over their tasks, take steps, take projects. And that's really what the goal is with this specific, that's definitely what the goal is with this specific situation. And I want to share a quick, kind of case study around this with one of my clients who came in. And I know there's a few people here who had shared, because I know, who are maybe in newer positions of leadership or being tasked to take on their new purview. And you may not necessarily be sure how to do this with success. And for those people who were struggling with perhaps number one, how are you communicating with yourself? One of my clients, Yi, was a freelance accountant for many, many years. She was promoted, though, to run a brand new team at Netflix, really thinking around how do we layer in innovation in their finance department. And one of the first things that we really had to deal with was imposter syndrome. Again, how she was talking to herself. She hadn't really spent time questioning to understand what kind of leader she wanted to be, right? Like what kind of tone she wanted to have, how she wanted to show up, how did she want to give feedback to her team. And her unique challenge was many of her now direct reports were former peers. So she had one level of relationship and dynamic that had been established, but as she got promoted, that had to change. And so instead of assuming that she could move through those dynamics with the same sense of approach, same sense of definition, identity, we worked through using this Oak method. How do you want to question yourself to understand who you want to be? Right. And through this work, she was able to really define, hey, I want to be somebody who is supportive. I want to be somebody who is encouraging. I want to be a leader who actually sets expectations, provides clear direction, and then holds people accountable. And through that, she was really able to develop a strong, powerful value proposition. So when she walked into rooms, she was able to gain the respect of peers who had one time seen her as kind of a fellow person, but because she knew she had to be able to push them and take them to another season, going through a time that was really challenging and full of change, this work really helped her build trust, help get more people in alignment, and really empower the whole team to move forward in a much more effective way. And so again, this idea of how are you communicating with yourself, how are you communicating with your team, and how are you communicating with others really comes to life when you think through this idea of leading with curiosity. All right. So I want to just take a quick second to any questions, anything popping up before we continue. I love for this to be interactive. Any of the concepts I've shared, fresh, surprising, I don't care, Kibi, like just give me a little bit of insight. Where is everybody at? What's one thing that was surprising or that you learned today thus far? So is that a sign that everything is absolutely clear? You knew?
Okay, but I was going to say what you shared, like the power of pausing and then naming your emotion at times, like the value in doing that for both yourself and even the person as appropriate.
Yeah.
And then one thing I'm just like circulating in my mind from something you shared around like the intonation of your voice. And I think in specific situations, when I am feeling that internal frustration, I actually think my voice does, like the intonation does change. And in the moment that feels most authentic to how I'm feeling, but I think that at moments can then feel like it's coming off, even if I'm asking the like curiosity, the questions of curiosity might be coming off as like, again, frustrated, defensive. So I'm just thinking about like how to manage that in the moment.
Well, it's a really good question, and it's a common one. And this is where I would shift to step 2, assessing your tone. So if you are already honoring and owning your emotion, the second step is really about tone, right? So if you are feeling frustrated, what are some steps that you typically take to help get you into a tone that might be more conductive, I mean, more conducive to getting what you want? And let me take a step back, because the first question is, what is the tone that you want to communicate? That's really the question.
For me in that moment, it's coming from a place of like care and openness.
Care and openness. So in those moments, what typically are body language, intonation and voice, things that you do to ensure that that's what you're getting across? Just, and imagine if you're not in a tough situation, just in general, what do you typically do?
I think in general, it's like I tend to lean forward in those conversations, and I'm like very present in how I'm engaging, nodding my head. And I know that because, again, for most of my team, that is how I'm able to show up. Someone put in the chat earlier, like trauma. And so I think there's moments where like a team member may trigger you in different ways due to like different personal and past experiences. Yep. And so I can like recognize the differences in myself when like one person might share the same type of like insight or feedback to another person. And so thinking about like, in other spaces, I tend to like lean forward and like, I think someone put in the chat earlier, like smile. But just show that like genuine
absolutely
like curiosity.
Well, and note those things, right? Because again, these are some of the things that we can take for granted, right? We've all been talking for so long that we sometimes forget a simple smile can shift anything. You know, and for those of y'all who have these beautiful smiles, you'd be amazed how it'll shift a room. And so being intentionally aware of how much those things can actually come into play is one of the most powerful shifts you can make just to become a more effective communicator, to be able to recover from things, right? If you're in a situation where you're not totally sure, you might feel a little worried about saying something, you don't want to offend somebody, smiling. I cannot say how powerful just a simple smile is to kind of set the tone that you want to make sure that the person experiences, right? That they feel seen. Autumn, I noticed your comment around turning step 3 to a question on herself was a surprising hit. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, all too often we forget about that first step. How are we talking to ourselves? How are we communicating with ourselves? Have we actually got clarity there? So we can understand the behaviors and the things that are driving these things that we may not want to have happen, but because of human nature, experiences that may have told us in the past that this is what I have to do in order to protect myself, we don't realize that it's actually causing more damage than we'd like it to have. Crystal, your thoughts around, I never thought to ask myself what kind of leader I want to be. Who here can relate to that? Like, that's a very common thing when people, when I start with folks, the idea of like, well, who said that you have to be like the manager that you just left? Or like, who said that you have to be like the person you see on TV when it comes to managing? Like, how much time have you actually spent considering, I want to understand what kind of leader I want to be? And so these are the types of things that we dive into in my work around helping leaders learn how to communicate like a pro. And so I want to share another example. I'm all about bringing this to life, giving receipts so people can really understand like how this actually shows up in real world situations with real world people. So I have a client, her name was Khadijah, and she was an exhausted exec who needed to build a team she could rely on. She came to me very frustrated, and here are some of the things that she was navigating. She felt very loyal to a team. She is currently the founder of a really successful hair care product company. She felt loyal to the team who had started with her, folks, family, friends who had been there from the beginning. But as she was growing and she was scaling, she began to become resentful because they could not give her what she wanted. They were dropping the ball, not meeting deadlines. She was really, really frustrated. After she came and worked with me, and by coming into the cohort, the Communicate Like a Pro cohort, she was able to let her unproductive team go. And she was able to do it with a confidence and a clarity that allowed her to lead with empathy, but also help them question to understand why this was happening. A very, very powerful transformation for her. Oops, sorry. went the wrong way. She was also exhausted, getting home at 9 o'clock, feeling like she was failing as a friend, a daughter, and a sibling because she was stuck and trying to navigate all of the different things, mainly because also the people who she had put in place to do the work just weren't doing it. And so, as many of us, we figure out we got to do it all ourselves. And so, through our work together, she was able to ultimately, like I said, because of her recognizing the kind of leader she wanted to be, doing the work individually to assess how do I want to show up in my own life? How do I want to honor my own needs? She was able to make some of the tough decisions that were necessary to let some of the people go on her team that weren't providing the insight she needed and the talent she needed. And she started leaving work by 6 p.m. and enjoying her weekends and finally finding herself, back in a safe and excited and energized space. And she was, again, tired of doing all the work herself. Her revenue was stagnant. And when she came into our group, she actually had an opportunity to take on a really, really big distribution client that was like transformational, six-figure revenue on the table. And after the completion of my cohort, she was able to not only add to qualified team members to help make sure she could deliver on this, but she secured that contract. And again, this was all by working through a lot of the things that we talked about, understanding the Oak method, being able to really get clear on the 3 levels of communication, and more specifically, taking advantage of being in community with a lot of other valuable, talented leaders who were in a similar season, right? So I'd love to just, before I dive into kind of some final things, ask you all, who here can relate to Khadijah's story? If you can, drop a 4 in the chat. I'd love to hear what parts of her story resonate, what parts of her story don't resonate, but actually, actually hear from you all specifically. Alyssa, I can see you saying, I can so relate. What about it is it that really related to you, and how is this showing up in your current situation?
I honestly can relate to every single one of her befores. I feel like I am an extremely loyal individual. Like, I am so understanding. I am so like, I feel like I'm that boss that they know my fun, fair, firm voice, but I'm hitting a point where I'm almost like getting resentful of their limitation. Like, that actually helped me name that I am kind of resentful because, I expect things from them because I know that they can do it, but when they take that like limitation and bring it down for themselves, I get kind of resentful for it because I know what they can do. And like sometimes it'll come out of like, Alyssa, you just have really high standards for yourself. And I'm like, I have high standards for this whole team, for this whole organization. And so I just feeling resentful. I don't want to feel that towards my staff. And I make sure not to let them see that. But it does sit with me, when I'm not with them, of, kind of resenting some of that limitation. And I come home frustrated and exhausted, knowing that I have to wake up and do the same thing the next day. So yeah, I can very much relate to her story.
Well, let's take this a little bit step further. If we were to
Okay.
apply the Oak method, as we just kind of talked through, I'm hearing you do the first step, which is owning your emotion.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the feeling words that you would use just in this example? Like maybe share one feeling word.
Um, Usually when I am feeling like things are out of whack, frustration is a really big one for me. Because if things are aligned, I should feel that success. So I think frustration is another emotion I would label with that.
Got it. And who at this point do you know you need to have a conversation with to be able to get on the other side of this and really move forward in your work?
I think I've had enough conversations like with my own bosses of the frustration that I have that I'm seeing in my team. That I think now it's time to just have that conversation with them. And I've kind of, taken the steps of what does that look like and kind of bringing my team together for them also to understand all the work that I have to do on my end. And then also the work that is getting added on because we're not taking the time of being, thoughtful about our work and, taking the actions so that I don't have to go back and, kind of fine tooth comb all of their work all of the sudden. And I feel like it's very recent where we did have a smooth groove and then something happened where now individuals where they didn't perform like this are now starting to perform at a lower level for themselves. So I think it's truly having a conversation with the team. And I feel like I say a lot like, how can I support you? In what ways are you having a barrier or a challenge to getting the things done? But I feel like they almost aren't identifying it in themselves, which doesn't help me help
Mm,
them.
okay. So what I begin to observe is perhaps is this an opportunity for you to begin to model this
Mm-hmm.
process of questioning to understand in their own lives, right? In their own
Yeah.
situations. Yeah. Because one thing I love to find out is what is your desired outcome? Like if you were to say, Kibi, I would be very, very not frustrated if these things would happen, what would you say?
Um, I would say work was getting done and deadlines were being met without me constantly having to remind people.
Got it. Okay, good stuff. Makes sense. And at this point, where are you in being able to push that forward? Like it sounds like you're having conversations. What would you say is the biggest area that you're struggling with?
I think right now it's like keeping my own emotions in check, where I'm very good at addressing within myself when I can have a conversation, when I've acknowledged where my emotions are at. Like when you were doing your 3 steps, I was noticing a lot of the conversation in the black word text bubbles. I was like, gosh, that's what I say when I'm frustrated. And I'm like, you should know this by now. I should not have to keep explaining this to you. And then I have to stop and I have to check myself and say, we're not going to send that email tonight. We're going to send it tomorrow morning. And then I can reassess my emotions. And then I can send that email in a, okay, so it sounds like there's some misunderstanding. How can I best help support you with some clarity? But right now I'm having a really hard time doing that where like every single day there's something coming up where I'm constantly finding myself frustrated. And I'm like, I can't even address this right now because today I'm not feeling, the best in check. And then tomorrow comes and then something happens and I don't feel the best in check. And so it's kind of like figuring out when am I feeling okay to have this conversation where it doesn't come off in a tone that I don't want it to, that isn't me. And my staff know when I'm coming off in a tone that is
Yeah.
not one of my own.
Yeah, definitely. Ooh, so much juice in there, Alyssa. Thank you so much for sharing. Shout out. And I saw I definitely give you a heart. I can recognize the connection. So a couple of immediate observations. One of the things that I would caution all of you all against doing is when you are feeling frustrated, sending emails, sending text messages, sending anything in writing. And here's why. When you are frustrated, tone matters so much. And it is so easy for tone to get lost when you are not having exchanges that allow for body language experiences, right? As I said, 80% of communication is your body language. So if you are frustrated, it is so hard to gauge how your words, how what you are hoping to get across is coming through. So just immediate thing. When you are feeling a heightened sense of anything that's negative, get on the phone. Talk to people. Voice
Hmm.
notes are your friend. Voice notes are your friend. If obviously you're working in remote situations, you can't always see people, it's a really, really powerful tool. So, again, this is really around assessing your tone, which you're doing, and I'm sorry, owning your emotions, which you're doing, but also figure out how do I give a tone that is
Hmm.
going to not worsen the situation,
Yeah.
not going to make things worse. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is what I'm observing is that there is a heightened, perhaps, energy around a lot of things that are going on. So where do you start? Right? That's what I'm
Yes.
saying. Like, where do you start? And so the one thing I would always say, and this is what we dive a lot into within the CLAP program, is start with yourself. That those 3 levels of communication are so key. So, and I'm observing you do this. The question is, how are you able to do it faster? How are you able to do it and move through those emotions much more quickly so that you don't get stuck, right? Because at this level of leadership and management that we're at, time is like our biggest resource, right? So questions I would encourage you to consider is like, well, what do I need to ensure that I'm not feeling frustrated? How much time do I need to be able to give myself prior to having a meeting? Really getting clear. Again, what are some of those leadership qualities that I want to exhibit? So that way, whenever you're up against a situation where you're having to contend with a lot of things at once that can cause you to shut down, you're able to at least have what I describe as kind of a North Star for how you want to lead, how you want to communicate. And then from there, you can kind of start tackling them one by one. And one of the things that's really important, especially if anybody's feeling exhausted, anybody's feeling overwhelmed, is to acknowledge that this is not easy and that it takes time, right? When you look at this case study from Khadijah, there are multiple things going on here, right? Like she feels loyal. I mean, she feels like she's betraying. She's got all these pressures around trying to close a big deal. She's exhausted. She's trying to be a mom. She's trying to be a friend, you know, all those types of things. And so one of the beauties of working in community with other people is you're able to not feel alone. You have some place where you can vent, right? You have some place where you can dive into some of these things. You also have some accountability in place, but more specifically, you also have time to actually put together a plan of attack that it's going to allow you to move in a way that allows you to check things off the box, right? Allows you to actually understand that this is not going to be solved overnight. You know, one of the benefits of working in longer term situations from a coaching perspective is the opportunity for this kind of transformational change to take place, right? So I just wanted to highlight that and continue to encourage you along your path. Yeah. So, well, listen, I'd love to hear any other tough conversations, challenges. You know, we've got a few minutes before we need to I mean, I wanted to allocate some time for us to really dive in. And if there's specific situations, questions you have, I'd love to be a resource. So kind of drop anything in the chat. You're very welcome. Or come off mute and let's dive. I see a couple of comments from Bree, expanding the team. She and I also say, some people don't know how to answer the questions. They don't know what they need. How many of you all can relate to that? Yeah, I can't see. I'm trying to see who's here. Sheena or Kia, who is here? I'm trying to see you guys. Hi, who's that?
I'm Kia. I got some music going in. Well, not my music. It's some music coming from somewhere else. I didn't want it to be so loud, but I just want to say real quickly, because you mentioned Bree, that's my daughter with SMG and my son-in-law. But I like to think I wear a lot of hats like they do, because we are partners and we work together and we are building family business, but a big community business. And so for me, I don't think I have a medium. I think mine is either one way, very up there, high passionate, or it's very low end where I feel like I've said enough and I shut it down and I start to compartmentalize and just trying to wear all the hats fairly, where I'm mom when I need to be or mother-in-law when I need to be, but then I'm a business owner, or that I'm a compassionate partner, or that I'm talking with some level of I call it sense or common sense, but it may not be that common to other people, which I think makes me frustrated, because I feel like it should just be so common. You should get it. And I like to call things rhetorical questions, like I would say with my children growing up. So I do that sometimes with adults. I go, this is not a rhetorical question. I want an answer. I'm asking because I need clarity on the answer. But I don't know if that's coming out too firm or hard. And so this is good for me, because I have been accused a lot of my tone and how I communicate. And I do want to be better, and not so much professional, but just kind and considerate of others.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate the vulnerability. And listening to you, it sounds like there are two areas of opportunity here. The first one is where you said I have kind of one high speed or low speed, right? You're like, I'm either hot or I'm kind of cold, is what I heard. And the one thing I would just share with you is that we are human beings, and there are over 3,000 emotions that we can experience at any given time. So when I hear people say that I'm hot or I'm cold, what I'm hearing is that perhaps there's an opportunity to build your emotional intelligence, to actually recognize all the different types of emotions you might be dealing with, because the most common things you hear are happy, mad, sad, glad, scared, right? The truth is there are so many different layers of emotions. And so the more you're able to articulate those emotions, hey, I'm feeling irritated. I'm feeling really nervous. I'm feeling agitated. I'm feeling delightful. As you start hearing me talk about the nuance, you actually are able to communicate in a much more clear and specific way, which allows people to recognize and actually empathize and begin to understand you and what your needs are. So that's one of the things I would say. And so I shifted back to this statement, to the slide around owning your emotions, because it's so powerful to be able to name what you're feeling. Identify the source of the emotion, and then you can begin to choose how you show up, right? And without that level of complexity, you do end up having a situation where you end up in these polar opposites that are not perhaps getting you the results that you want. And the one thing I always ask my clients is, are you getting the results that you want? Is your goal to be right, or is your goal to move forward? Because at the end of the day, you can tell me all of the things. This is how I am. This is my personality. And yet, when I ask you, are you getting the results that you want? And the answer is no, there is an opportunity for us to figure out where we go forward, because there is always a way forward. And so those are a couple of things I just wanted to identify and share. How does that land on you when I bring that up, though?
Oh, let me see. Okay, here. Well, you're not only on my street, you're knocking at the door and you're about to walk in. It's landing home and it's helping because I don't want to be seen as a monster. I really don't when I communicate and when I say something. And you're right about the emotions, because I would tell people who I say know me, you love me when you know me. But I often like to think I do show every emotion, like in a true form of sense. But yeah, you're on it.
Well, the truth is you are showing it. What the opportunity is how to communicate that, right? This is about communication. If you're not
Right.
able to communicate, hey, I'm feeling very exasperated. Like I'm
Right.
feeling very disappointed. Oftentimes, fear and anger are really a secondary emotion. I'm sorry. Oftentimes, fear is the real emotion. You have these other kind of second or third descriptives of the emotion. Like if you say you're angry, oftentimes it means you're afraid. If you say you're disappointed, oftentimes it still means you're afraid. So being able to put words to that is really what allows you to become a master communicator. Again, we are
Right.
human. We all experience these emotions. The folks that are able to have much more masterful dynamics and exchanges are able to articulate those emotions. And so that's what a lot of our work is in my coaching with leaders, is really giving you the ability and the vocabulary to be able to do that in a more effective way, if that makes sense. Makeba asks, how do we deal with passive aggressiveness? How many of y'all have dealt with the passive aggressive person, right? I deal with this all the time, and I do it at times. The way to deal with passive aggressiveness is to be honest about your emotion. Passive aggressiveness shows up when you're not actually saying how you feel. Instead, you're saying a smart pop off comment that is, in essence, an assumption, and it causes additional communication breakdowns. So, the fastest way to get out of a passive aggressive state is to own your emotions. Hey, I'm feeling very frustrated. Not, I guess you're going to do this again, right? I'm feeling frustrated. Well, remember the last time you showed up late? How often do we find ourselves doing that? We're moving into an assumption that's a little snarky, when the truth is what we want to do is actually move with an honest, radical conversation, which is best achieved when you're able to leverage my Oak method, right? So owning my emotion, I'm feeling very frustrated, assessing my tone. How do I lead with a tone that is actually going to get me to the result that I want, right? Not the person popping off at me, not the person snapping at me, but actually listening and hearing me. Hey, I'm really feeling frustrated. It's a very different tone. The passive aggressiveness is gone, and I'm actually indicating a tone that is exasperated, that is exhausted. Assessing my tone. Last thing is I'm questioning to understand. I'm really feeling frustrated because I have consistently asked you to show up to meetings on time and you haven't had that happen. What am I missing here? What's going on? That is how you overcome the passive aggressiveness. And I'm doing this very quickly because I have a muscle and I've been coaching clients for, kind of years and lots of hours. That is really how you get to being able to lead with confidence, clarity, and authority. There's no confusion. There's no uncertainty. You know how I feel. I'm putting forward a tone that is understanding, yet also specific and clear. And I'm encouraging the other person to get involved by asking them a question so I can understand, what am I missing here? How does that help bring to life help answer your question, Makeba? just in general? I just want to make sure that that's
Is that in reference to my own passive aggression or someone else's?
both.
Both.
Both. Yeah, because
So,
if you're being passive aggressive, you're not being honest about how you're feeling.
right. And if the other person is, because that's what I'm dealing with right now is passive aggression. And I'm not the only one who's noticed it or has been on the other end of it. Other team members have. And so the best way to, you know, I mean, it's calling it for what it is, aggressive, or is it, you know what I mean? Like, is that bad to call it out and say, I feel like you're not being upfront, you know, you're kind of being a little passive aggressive and you're not being upfront about how you feel, what's going on.
Yeah, I
Is,
mean, I would just to answer that, yeah, I would be mindful of using phrases like I feel that. No, we didn't
Mhm.
really get a chance to get into this, but for those of you who work with
Right.
don't understand, I feel that is a statement. I'm sorry, it's an assumption in disguise.
Got it.
We say it all the time. Well, I feel that you should be listening, and I feel that is what I call falling into that trap. And that is absolutely leading with an assumption. And anytime
Okay.
you lead with an assumption, it's going to break down. A feeling is absolutely that. I feel frustrated. I feel angry. I feel surprised. There's no that behind it. So this is a little
Mhm.
trick you can use to make sure that you're paying attention to how many times you're actually leading with an assumption versus an actual feeling.
Mhm.
But to your point, Makeba, yes, I feel whatever the emotion is.
Mhm.
And therefore, because of your behavior, and I want to know, how aware, I mean, whatever the question is, you want to understand how aware are you of it? Why are you doing this? What's going on? What am I missing? But it forces the other person to acknowledge your feelings,
Mhm.
which is how you get out of the passive aggressive stance. Passive aggressive is when two people know exactly how they feel, but they are not communicating it to each other. And instead, you get in all kinds of quips, right?
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah. Like, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to be mindful of time too. So Autumn, I want to make sure
Thank
I
you.
saw your question here. Thank you. I hope that helps. I
Yeah.
need a direct convo with the higher level director that isn't responding with what I need to do my job, which is impacting the entire firm. Just to make sure I'm hearing that, Autumn, you need to tell somebody that you need help with something, and this person is not responding or not being responsive. Just so I'm clear.
Yeah, so it's a director in a different team, but we work closely together. And I have a particular project that I need her sign off on. I have sent everything over to her, and I need her to review it and give me the sign off. And I've, for the past 2 weeks, repeated been like, "How's it going? How is it coming along? Is it ready?" I even went on there, and this was maybe me being passive aggressive. I created a time block on her calendar for her to work on it. Um, Made a video like going, like I've done everything that I could think of and just not getting a response. And now it's at the point where it's impacting my ability to do what I need to, because I work in operations. And so like there's a huge project that has to be done by the end of the year. And she goes on PTO next week. So like I have 2 days to get this completed. And so it's just very, very frustrating at this level. And I'm like,
Absolutely, yeah.
you
And
know,
how many times have you had a direct conversation with her about this frustration? Like
um,
email, not like one-on-one.
I haven't I haven't ever specifically stated my feeling and like frustration with it. I've more led with here's what I need, and this has been a project that's been going on for like 3 months. So she knows what the things are that are needed. Um so it's been more just like factual of this is what I need, when can I get it, how's it going, and the follow-up type stuff. I haven't really brought my emotions into it to show like you're
Yeah,
preventing me
that's
from
what it
doing
sounds
my
like.
job.
No, but that's what it sounds like. And that sounds like that's the exact thing that needs to happen, right? Because
Yeah.
what I'm observing is a lot of the sugarcoating, I'm
Yeah.
going to do all this extra work when the reality is having a very radical, candid conversation with her, I would imagine would push her forward. Because my question for you is if I were to come to you and say, hey, I'm feeling really, really nervous, my job is on the line here.
Yeah.
And I have asked you to do something that hasn't happened, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. At this point, we're at a point now where it's critical. So what am I missing here? What is preventing you from giving me what I need? If I were to come to you and say that, what would your reaction be? Think, putting yourself in her situation.
I would feel like you want to hear what's actually on my plate and what is creating the issue for me to get that done.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is what allows you to move to action, right? Like
Yeah.
everything with Communicate Like a Pro is getting to action so we can move forward, right? At this level of the game, this is not about trying to be right. Like we're not trying to prove to somebody, you're making my life horrible, you're doing all these things. What you're trying to do is get to a solution that allows you to move forward. And so
Yeah.
this is where this Oak method, this is where a lot of the concepts within Communicate Like a Pro are brought to life, because this critical difference is made so clear. At this level of the game, when it comes to leading and managing, so much about your success is dependent on how clear you are able to articulate the consequences that happen when people do not act. And the best way to highlight that is to attach it to emotion. It's the reason why in my Oak method, the first step is really owning your emotions. And so one thing, Autumn, for you might be helpful is really asking yourself, what is causing me to think in my mind that if I were to go to her and tell her my job is on the line, that that would not impact her in a healthy, positive way? What's making you potentially believe that this woman is that insensitive, that much of a, kind of heartless human, that her hearing those things wouldn't cause her to take action? Something to
I
just contemplate. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see her as heartless, or like mean or, vindictive or like any really negative things. I think she struggles really hardcore with time management. And I know that she has really intense ADHD, and she does a lot to try and manage that and work with that. She's brilliant at the things that she does, but time management and like getting specific tasks done are challenging for her. So I'm aware of those. So yeah, so I don't think any of it's like coming from a negative, like malice place on her side.
Yeah. Well, it
I
sounds
guess
like then you answered the question, right? So what I hear you doing is actually giving very kind of potential, like plausible reasons. The next step is really moving into a question to understand, what do you need for me to be able to get this done? How can I help you lock this down? What can I take off your plate, right? Because at this point, it sounds pretty critical. Like it's end of the year. So
Yeah.
you got to move into kind of like triage mode. But these are the kinds of questions that I will be leading with. Definitely have a conversation immediately and then begin to layer in your emotional resonance here with a tone that sounds supportive, right? Because I'm hearing you articulate understanding. Hey, like I get it. You shared with me vulnerably about some of the, learning differences and the focus differences. So how can we work together? But
Yeah.
this is about moving from being in your head and worried about potential scenarios that are not actually likely, because you're telling me this, and getting into a real honest conversation. All right. All right, lovely people. Listen, I want to be mindful. We are getting a little bit close to sign off. Thank you so much for just sharing some of the feedback, sharing some of the challenges that you're dealing with. I hope you found this helpful. I want to take a minute now to again kind of ignite the idea, information about my program. Sorry, I'm a little tired. It's late here, but share more information just about the offer, the program that I do. If any of the challenges that you brought up in here are acute or real, you're finding that the information that I'm sharing, some of the tools that I've given you a bit of a teaser on, are helping unlock you, are helping you begin to think about ways you might approach your leadership style and your communication approach very, very intentionally, I would love to invite you to consider joining my next Communicate Like a Pro cohort. As I shared earlier, lots of personalized evaluation. The assessments that we did early on, we go into much more depth. We begin to unpack the why. I asked you guys a lot of questions like, why do you think that you are having some of the emotions. There are real reasons, right? And so we spend a lot of time in the first part of the cohort really diving into and understanding how connected you are to the self conversations, how connected you are to the learned behaviors that you may be bringing into situations that are causing you to get stuck. Within that, we approach the work and the learning within a biweekly module-based lesson approach. It's a 6-month program, and it incorporates a ton of live coaching. So all the stuff that we just did here, you get much more personalized attention. And again, you get a supportive cohort of people who are in a similar season, right? I loved hearing you all bring to life the collective challenges you're facing. And so one of the beautiful dynamics of the Communicate Like a Pro program is that you all become your own best teachers, your own best resources, because it's a highly curated group of people who are all at the same level, managing the same challenges. And as a part of the cohort, you also get, as I share, 2 one-on-one coaching sessions with me. And again, I just want to highlight again the exclusive bonus offer that you will get if you decide to sign up before January 17th. The cohort kicks off the cohort closes, application process closes at the end of January. But if you sign up prior to the 17th, you are getting a free 90-minute one-on-one session with me, which is really around kind of messaging and branding and really ensuring that you really understand how to articulate your value, right? Like how to ensure that as you move into 2025, you are getting the prime, kind of opportunities. You are walking into rooms and gaining the respect from your direct reports, from your stakeholders. You really have clarity on how to articulate your value. And this is so key right now because I am hearing so many of my clients complain and or hear from their own friends how hard it is to actually be able to separate yourself from the noise right now when it comes to either perhaps looking for jobs externally or even internally, as you think about people who are potentially considering scaling back, really wanting to invest in people that they really believe in. How well are you actually claiming and owning your power? This is really what this session is about from a messaging, from a value articulation perspective. You'll walk away. And I've done this I do this with a lot of my clients, and it's one of the most transformational experiences that a lot of folks have when they're in that season where they're trying to elevate and make sure that their core strengths are really coming through. So on that note, I do want to highlight a couple of things before I let you guys go. If you enjoyed this, please, please, please spread the word. I will be sending out a recording of this after the fact. So if there are people in your network, who might be struggling with this, let them know. I have 2 other workshops coming up in January. One is called Asking Big, which is really about creating a culture of innovation to really help you boost revenue. How do you actually make sure you're asking the right questions? There is a curiosity culture in your organization to ensure that you're not running away from opportunities that could be very helpful in helping you boost revenue into 2025. And then the third one is called Lead Smarter, Not Louder. So this is the art of clear leadership communication. So in this one, we talk about how to say tough things with a soft touch. This is really about how do you make sure you're being clear? How do you make sure you're being direct? How are you making sure that there aren't any issues around alignment and understanding to ensure that everybody is moving in accordance going forward? So if there aren't any questions or needs, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer. I do just want to say thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for showing up. I hope you all found value here. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of you all move into 2025 communicating like a pro. All righty. And again, I am happy to stay behind if anybody wants to dive into something, have some additional specific individual questions that you want to work through. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer. But thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Yes, amazing,
Wonderful.
amazing. Thank you so much, Kibi.
Thank you, Kibi. This
Good
was
stuff. I
amazing.
know I can't see all the faces, so thank you for everybody who was on. I love it.
This was fantastic. Sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Matt. Thank you. I know. Shout out. There are a couple of people, a couple past clients in the room, so I just want to shout you all for continuing to show up, show out. I hope you all found value.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kibi. This has been amazing.
You're welcome. Definitely. I know a few people
Always
are,
good to see you.
I know, definitely. Absolutely. And like I said, if you want to think a little bit further about kind of how you approach this conversation, because it sounds like it's pretty time sensitive, I'm happy to be a resource. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna my ops team has a meeting tomorrow, and one of the agenda items is our pain points, and this is on my pain point of, hey,
Mhm.
I have to have this information. So,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, what's the thing that you're most worried about happening by just saying that?
I think my biggest struggle with anything in general is speaking up for what my actual needs are. Um, and this is just one of those things of like, I have to be forceful. Um, I have to be direct. I have to say, hey, I actually need this from you. I
Mhm.
can't take no for an answer. And,
Yeah.
you know, we have similar titles, but she has like a higher level within the firm.
Mhm.
And so, and I'm not one to get like really hung up on titles and like positions and all that sort of stuff, but she also has a lot more on her plate as far as like team is concerned. I don't know, maybe I'm just giving too many maybe
Well,
I'm giving too many reasons of like why I don't need to say what I need to say.
the short answer is yes, you are. And the way to counter that is to begin to do reasons for the consequences, right? Like all too often, we can be focused as leaders, especially when we're stuck in this, I want to be kind.
Mhm.
And that becomes the thing that we overcompensate for, is we actually aren't doing the work to outline very clearly the other opportunity costs, right? Like
Yeah.
what I haven't heard you articulate very clearly is, how is this going to actually impact the firm? What are the negative consequences?
Yeah, I mean the big thing is that it's going to directly impact our ability to deliver on services that clients have engaged us for.
How? Get even more specific. How much money is on the table? How many, people you're serving are going to be impacted? Like really getting into the specificity is extremely, extremely helpful.
Yeah, so there's 5 specific things that I need from her, and each one of those clients have paid, it's a $500 fee for
Mhm.
them to engage us with that service. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, y- and it's probably anywhere between like 1 to 200 clients that have
Yeah.
engaged us for some, whether it's one or all 5 of those services. So I'd have to break it down and like get the actual number of
You
like
just said that's $100,000 on the line.
that's a lot of money.
Real talk. Like, how well have
Yeah.
you articulated? We're talking about $100,000 on the line because you have not given me what I've asked you for X
Yeah.
ago. Really beginning to think through, how do you articulate that value? Gotcha. Adante, did you want to say something real quick? I know you stayed behind. I didn't know if
I
you
just
had a.
wanted to say hi, and it was so good to see you.
Okay,
And
good
thank you. This was
stuff.
great,
It's
and we'll
so
follow
good
up.
to
So,
see you. All
so
right,
good to
love
see you. I
you.
really appreciate this. Right back at
Take
you.
care, Adante.
Bye.
Yeah. Good to see you. Yeah, Bree said numbers don't lie. I mean, we
Yeah.
dive into this a lot more in the cohort, but this is where we really start getting into like the nitty-gritty and the specifics, the mechanics of it. It's
Yeah.
one thing to articulate what you need. It's another thing to actually add weight to what you need, i.e., what's the next level step that we have to take to ensure that the person really understands the magnitude.
Yeah. It's funny that I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, I'm working at an accounting firm. Literally numbers is everything that we do all day long.
Yeah.
So and every week we give updates on what clients have engaged us for and where that is, where that puts the firm financially. So we talk
Yeah.
about it as a firm. Hey, we've had X number of dollars come in as revenue, you know, so many people have signed their engagement, and here's the pieces, and what I need from her is pieces that are part of those engagements that
Yeah, definitely. What's clear to me is what you need. What it sounds like the opportunity here is for you to be clear and communicating how you not getting what you need
yeah.
actually hurts the firm, right? And this is where we get into how are you communicating with your team and with the organization, right? Because if you start thinking about how much are you actually kind of circulating this or messaging this at the organizational level, she'll feel
Mhm.
that impact. Right?
Yeah.
She will start to feel that, because if you start dropping that with the CEO, you start dropping that with your stakeholders, then there's some weight here. Like then there's some actual conversations to be had. Right now, what I observe is that there isn't enough stakes in it for her. So she's
Mhm.
just blowing it off. So the more you as a leader can begin to articulate energetically what changes when people don't do exactly what they've been asked to do is how you begin to communicate more effectively, how you begin to communicate like a pro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a great way to put that in there because I can easily do that. I have a whole sheet. I can just run a couple of checks
Yeah.
there and I can see how many engagements include those particular services that I need her to
All right. Well, I
sign
want to hear a readout. Please share.
up.
Love it. Tia and Bree, I know you guys are still here. I just wanted to give you a chance to come off mute if there's anything in particular you wanted to ask about. Are you guys still here?
So yeah, we're still here. This is actually Art, the other part of Smart Media Group. Breeze is
Oh, I'm sorry. Tell
no,
me your.
it's totally okay. It's totally okay. Her is me, me is her, we are one.
I know, but I don't think I got your name. I didn't hear your name.
Art,
Oh,
A-R-T.
Art. Yes. Okay, got it.
Yes. So it's not really a question per se, but just something that we navigate and will, I know, continue to navigate as we continue to manage clientele and in different aspects. But just knowing that you will have to consistently have difficult conversations when it helps people grow. I know personally, I'm trying to make sure that I don't have a problem with having the conversation. My issue is articulating it in a way that is not um, I don't know, feels like coming down on somebody or like giving them the brunt of a sword when in reality, I tend to talk to people before it becomes an issue. So that there shouldn't be any like immediate detrimental issue, you know? Um, so yeah, just again, navigating that aspect so that I can communicate in an effective way. Because
Yeah.
again, at the end of the day, I want to get solution. Like I'm so solution oriented that it is just like when we start, like if I start arguing with someone or tempers flare in a conversation, I just go like, wait. Where's the solution in this?
Yeah.
Like I've clearly missaid something or there's something going on in my communication, I feel most.
So, because I'm hearing you actually say that you're having success, so I think I'm having a hard time articulating and diagnosing what the core problem is. If I were to ask you, keeping in mind the 3 levels of communication with yourself, with your team, and with your organization, where is the breakdown happening from your perspective? Just so I'm clear. Like if you were to choose one of those 3.
It's with the team.
Okay, got it. So, and what I'm hearing you say is you typically will try to get ahead of potential situations, but finish that for me.
But in doing so, I may not use the correct words.
And what's giving you that kind of concern? Like when you say I'm not using the correct words, what's happening when you bring it up in advance?
So say the outcome, it's not the outcome usually shares in direction desired, but I end up having to come back to the conversation and say
So
it
you're
differently.
repeating yourself again.
Well, I think I'm adding more clarity because I don't feel like I'm saying the same thing. I feel like I'm saying a similar thing in a different fashion or in a different way.
You probably are, which it sounds like you're repeating yourself, right? Because whenever somebody doesn't get the result that they're intending to get, that means that you're not being clear. Despite what you may think, the truth is the data shows whether you're being clear. So this is where an opportunity for deeper questioning to understand could come through and really assessing the quality of your questions as opposed to just asking questions, right? Because there is a difference in the kinds of questions you ask, and it'll dictate what is the quality of your answers. The one thing I would immediately throw out is how often are you asking open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions?
Not very. I definitely can work on that.
Yep. Yeah. You'll notice in the presentation that I I'm sorry, that I walk through. Typically between kind of like the do not and the do scenario was a distinction between you leading with a closed-ended question. Hey, you got this? You should know this, which is really a yes or no. There's not really a need to, in the kind of most like honest, truthful nature of a closed-ended question, it's really yes or no. But if you're asking it from the context, hey, what additional information do you need to make sure that you are successful in this?
Yeah, that's a whole different question that requires
Whole different
definition.
question, right? Whole different question. Yeah. Or, hey, I've said this a couple of times and I'm noticing that I still haven't seen a change in your results. What are you hearing when I communicate to you? Please say it back to me.
Okay. Then you're making sure the lines of communication are clearly understood.
Absolutely, yeah. And we dive into this in clap a lot because there is a strong perception that any question will get you the results that you want. And that is absolutely not true. And unfortunately, we are given a lot of models in television, in media, when we hear people interviewing that we think is actually the way to ask questions when it's actually the exact opposite. And it's what gets a lot of leaders stuck because they're mimicking what they see on television and what they've perhaps observed by other leaders who are not actually great with ensuring a clarity and alignment, which looks like asking a lot of closed-ended questions. One of the hardest muscles to break, but it absolutely is essential. And so this is where a lot of our work in CLAP dives into. How do I actually ask a quality conversation?
Well,
I'm
that's
sorry,
definitely going to be in my
question.
repertoire.
Quality question. Yeah.
I appreciate that, Kibi. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. No, definitely. Yeah. And one tip I'll give you, start with W's. Who, what, where, when, why. Typically, if your question starts with the W, you will get better results. You'll get better data.
Okay.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Kia, did you have anything you wanted to share before I hop off?
Oh, okay. Look, I was waiting, getting out the car, but I didn't want it to be too put on the light. I want to say I enjoyed it. It's very helpful. Of course, I'm going to be getting in more of the cohorts because I have been over groups and organizations, in corporate. And so you're right. I have always thought of myself being great at communicating because I would ask a question, but I really feel as though I need help with not sounding condescending. Or, like I say, when you say owning, mine has to be owning because I'm very short, curt, and I often label it under being professional in business. Like I just need the result.
Yeah,
I say I just need the and so I to me not to overthink something I just did or said. I try to start with let me think about the facts of it and don't go with the feeling. And so that's where I feel like I need the help to because it's like you said, I know how to smile and I don't like to say put on airs. I really just like to really be genuine. Like I like to smile because the smile is there. And if I'm upset, but mine I know, and this will be something you have to help me on the sounding condescending or the sounding very curt and quick and short because I'm just like, this is just the facts. And I always felt like it's gonna give me my results because they know I'm not shirking or I'm not covering it with anything. I'm just saying this is what it is.
Yeah.
Take it or so that's where I need
Couple
the
of
help.
myths I want to bust with you right now. Couple of myths. First one is that in order to be effective, you have to remove your emotion. Biggest lie.
Okay.
Biggest lie. It is not always ideal to be like blunt, no emotion. You actually typically oftentimes do not get the results that you want. And this idea that leaders have to be like emotionless, kind of by the book is a complete lie. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing I would share with you is your statement around well, it's not really, but it's just more just an observation. Because like when I hear people say I'm oftentimes being described as condescending or, curt or not really quote unquote patient, oftentimes this is a function of two things that are not happening. A, the person's not really owning their emotion, really being like very clear and in expressing what they are feeling. And then B, it is still a tone problem. Right. And listen, Kia, I am queen of tone problem. I don't know if you heard when I started, I was like, when somebody was like, you got a tone problem, I was like, ah. And yet I have to own, well, what is happening? Because data is real. Like you can't deny the data. So even if the words the person might be using to describe it might be a little offensive or hurtful, the experience is still real. So something that you're doing is creating an experience where someone doesn't feel typically heard, seen, celebrate, like there's something that's happening. So those are the two things that we have to work through. And I'll tell you, as it relates to the first one, this idea of emotionless leadership is one of the biggest fallacies. It is hard because all too often, especially as Black women, we're seen as overly emotional, aggressive, all of the things. And so there's this constant hedging that we're doing, which can create more problems. When the reality is, if we can just simply own an emotion, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling really excited. Like, say that. Just say it with our words and not have to feel like we have to do it with our body. It will solve so many problems, right? So, in the moment where you might be feeling, I got to get through this, I don't have a lot of time. Hey, I'm feeling really, really overwhelmed right now. Started with that. Got so much coming at me. So, I'm going to apologize in advance if my tone can come across as feeling impatient, Kurt. That is not my intention. I just need you to hear, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I got a lot coming at me. Saying that initially can just be very powerful, just to set the tone. So that's just one example of the kind of stuff that, we begin to dive into in the cohort. The second thing is this idea of like, how do you actually become aware of your tone? Because what I have observed 9 times out of 10 is people think that they're doing one thing when their body is doing something else. I will tell it to you all the time. If I were to sit here and have you do a conversation with me and I were to just say, do it the way, I could give you 5 to 10 things immediately that are not giving the tone that you say you want to give. It's learned behaviors. It's instinctive. And so this is where a lot of the unlearning has to happen. First is like, can we get aware? And this is where I talk about in the cohort, we do a lot of assessment, a lot of connection. What's actually happening to us in our bodies? Because unless we can figure that part out, we're not aware of it, it's going to be very hard to change the behavior. But those are some things I would also just say. You may think that you're not doing it when the truth is 9 out of 10 you are.
I'm signing up.
Yeah.
I'm signing.
Well, take a look. Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you were able to get we're going to send a follow-up email that'll have a link, but yeah, definitely. Definitely that. And yes, I will share the whole thing's being recorded. So yes, I will put all of this up so that folks can take a look at it. Because you're right. It's oftentimes, this is the stuff that I love to do and where I get excited about, so obviously the broader information is extremely helpful and valuable. And I find that, folks really find a lot of value out of this stuff too. So hopefully that's helpful to get you a little bit of a push. Go ahead.
I signed up already for the first one in January. I got the other link up ready to sign for the one for the 17th. No, it's really helpful because I don't want to be mislabeled. That's one of the things. And I am an overthinker and I sit with my thoughts and feelings of what I've done. I may blow up in the moment, but a lot of times I do. I sit with those thoughts for a while and I ask those questions to myself, which is how I get to compartmentalize it. But I want to do better with not, because I will shut down. I do one or the other, you know, and when I shut down, it's not good, you know. So I need to.
You got to build a muscle. This is about a muscle, right? Like we've been talking for as long as we've been alive, right? So a lot of the habits that we learn are ingrained in us. Like, so we have to unlearn. And so this is one of the reasons why my cohort is 6 months, because not only do we have to begin to get awareness, then we get a chance to teach you the tools, because I highlighted, the kind of high level principles, but each of those individual steps, own your emotions, assess your tone, question, understand, take a lot. I talk about this as a simple tool in concept because I want you to be able to refer to it. Oak, oak, oak. Like it's easy to remember, yet in action, it is not easy. And so each one of these steps requires, intentionality, reflection, like sitting, and then actually moving in real situations to see how you do, right? Because everything is easy until you get popped off, right? Like until somebody triggers you, until somebody pushes that button. And that's when this stuff really matters, right? And that's where the stakes are highest, because at this point, as leaders, we are out here navigating big time deals, big time hires, situations that can make or break us. And so this is where being able to have mastery over this is not about communicating like, a first time hire. It's not about communicating even as like a direct report. It's about communicating like a pro, like a leader, like a senior leader. So you can really make sure you're activating on the vision that you have ahead of you. So
this is gonna be good.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. I just want to say thank y'all for hanging behind. Art, it was good to meet you. Please send my love to Miss Bree. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all in the subsequent sessions on the 7th and the 14th. And obviously, happy to, schedule a discovery call, even if you want to learn a little bit more as it relates to the cohort. Because I'm excited and there's a lot of interest. So I'd love to, get anybody else who showed up today in the mix if it makes sense for where you are right now. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, we'll do.
I'm doing it. Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Have a good holiday as well. All right. Take care.
You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye. Oh, wonderful.